Aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter une interview originale que j'ai faite sur la vente. Interview avec une personne très particulière puisque c'est un philosophe. C'est assez rare finalement dans le milieu de mélanger à la fois de la philosophie de haut niveau et le monde de la vente.
If there's one thing that will make me trust someone and go back to them and to have a long-term customer, it's when they tell me that I shouldn't be paying for something they could be selling me.
Julian Baggini, c'est un philosophe anglais. Il a écrit dans le Financial Times, dans le Guardian, dans le New York Times, qu'il s'intéresse à la question du business, en particulier à l'éthique. J'ai voulu lui parler pour qu'il puisse s'exprimer sur la compatibilité possible qu'il peut y avoir entre la vente et l'intégrité. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire d'être un commercial et d'être intègre? Est-ce que c'est compatible? Comment on peut monter un business en restant intègre, en restant honnête? Pour moi, c'était vraiment top de faire cette interview et j'espère que vous allez apprécier. Je vous laisse tout de suite avec les images.
Hello, Julian.
Hi, Quentin.
Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Very happy to have you to speak today about integrity and sales performance. Maybe before starting to dive in the subject, can you introduce yourself?
I'm a philosopher. I did my PhD at the University of London, but my interests, I think, were fairly broad, and academic life is very narrow. So with a colleague called Jeremy Stangram, I started a philosophy magazine in 1997, which is publishing work by mostly academic philosophers, but for a wider audience. And since then, I managed to do more and more writing, and I've published books, articles, newspapers, and worked with some businesses too.
Julian Baggini nous explique qu'il n'était pas satisfait avec la partie académique du monde philosophique et que très vite, il allait se tourner sur la partie business pour aller chercher un terrain de jeu plus grand et plus intéressant pour lui à l'époque. Donc tout de suite, je lui ai demandé, mais finalement, qu'est-ce qu'il pense de la combinaison entre la performance commerciale et l'intégrité?
We are the only company in France that work both on performance and integrity. So this is really a big topic for us. And I wanted to understand, as a philosopher, what do you think first when thinking about sales performance and integrity?
I think that's a very good question, because one has to ask what do we mean by performance? Okay, so the first philosophical question for everything is, what do we mean by our word? For a long time, performance has been understood in a business sense in a very narrow terms. It's basically about returns, mainly to shareholders, or profits to the private individual, and that is the measure of performance. And so in a way, if you think about it, is strange. There's no reason why we should think that is what good performance means. There are very few people who honestly think that the only thing about performance that matters is profit in the short to medium term. Almost everyone would like to think that it's more than that. It's about actually creating an organization, we say, with good reputation, that's trusted, that does some good. I mean, not good necessarily in that it feeds the poor, but if you're a hairdresser, right, what makes a good hairdresser is that you give good haircuts and that people enjoy coming to you and they leave feeling good, right? That's
Exactly.
Good performance.
Yeah.
And the idea that it would be a better hairdresser if you did none of those things, but you had a better profit margin, is a strange way of thinking. So if you think of performance in that sense, if you have a more expansive idea of what performance is, then I don't see any conflict with integrity. But I think, generally speaking, the organizations that people like working for and the organizations that people respect are ones with integrity. And that if you believe or know that it doesn't have integrity, then it's very difficult to work for them, and it's very difficult to like them or admire them.
Ce qui est hyper intéressant dans cette partie, c'est que Julian Baggini nous explique que finalement, l'intégrité, ça dépasse complètement simplement l'acte de vente. Et dans la performance commerciale, par exemple, la rétention des talents, c'est un vrai sujet. Et l'intégrité, c'est un facteur de rétention des talents, puisque on sait globalement que les gens sont moins à l'aise, voire pas à l'aise avec le fait de travailler avec des entreprises dont ils ne pensent pas qu'elles sont honnêtes et qu'elles sont intègres. Finalement, pour des gens qui veulent recruter des talents, l'intégrité, c'est un essentiel à avoir. Donc, on ne peut pas faire de performance sans talent et on ne peut pas avoir de talent sans intégrité. Je vous laisse boucler la boucle et vous aurez compris à quel point c'est important. Et là, forcément, on peut se dire qu'il y a des limites et que parfois, l'intégrité, ça pourrait aller à l'encontre de la performance commerciale. Encore une fois, je pose la question et on va voir tout de suite ce que ça donne.
When do you think integrity could go against like short-term performance? For the example of the hairdresser, the turnover becomes the result of being a good hairdresser as having good conversation with your customer, doing the clean haircuts and so on. And then the turnover is the result. And the better you are, the better you turnover you do. But the end goal is not the turnover.
I think there can and often are conflicts between integrity and short-term, even long-term performance. I live in the southwest of England, and there is a small independently owned coffee chain called Boston Tea Party, and they are very committed to ethical policies. And I have to say, very realistic too. They're not, totally pure saints. If you look at their supplies, not everything they get can be of the optimal standard. They have to be practical. But they made a decision that that they could no longer, in good conscience, give single-use disposable cups for takeaway coffee, right? Because these things are terrible. They're really hard to recycle. They tend to end up in the street. So they thought this is just not good. They decided they weren't going to do it. So if you buy a takeaway coffee in their cafe, you have to bring your own cup, or you can hire one, or you have to buy one.
Okay.
Now that decision cost them in their first year of doing that, and they lost around, I think, £250,000. That's nearly €250,000. They lost a lot of money, but they did that because this was important to them. Now, I believe in the long run, that's good. I believe in the long run, it helps to really establish that when everybody's talking about the environment but doing very little, these are people you can trust. They're trying, right? Yeah. But in the short term, and maybe even the medium term, it's very, very, very bad for business.
What would you say to people to help them seeing the fact that being more a person of integrity when doing business will help you grow your business?
Well, I mean, I'm very reluctant to be too reassuring. In the corporate social responsibility world and the business ethics world, people repeat the mantra, good ethics is good business, as though this were simple and as though there were never any sacrifices. And I just think people have to be honest. Sometimes good ethics and integrity is not good for your business in the short term. So I think the only way to make this case to people is to first of all say, good ethics and integrity is 100% compatible with a successful business, okay? There are lots of very successful businesses that do this. Things like Patagonia, Lush, Dr. Bronner. These are not small companies, they're big ones. Yeah. And even some large companies have done this. So, you can have a successful company, but I think unless you're prepared to accept the fact that maybe purely in terms of profit, you will not necessarily have the same profit if you act with integrity. If you're not prepared to do that, then your integrity means nothing, does it? Because do you know any ethical person who says, I will never make any choice in my life which results in me having less money as a result? That's not what consumers do. I often buy products which are more expensive because of some ethical commitment, particularly when it comes to food and drink. I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, but I believe in animal welfare. And so when I buy an animal product, I want to know it's good animal welfare. That's generally more expensive. So I make a choice as a customer to, have less personal profit in order to do the right thing. But I can afford it. I know that I'm not going to be broke, right? So I can have a successful life, but it will cost me more. In the same way, if your business, how can anyone believe you if you say I have integrity and ethics? If you say, but I'm never going to make a choice which reduces my profit in the short term. In the long term, I do believe that this is good for the resilience and the longevity of a company. That the companies that last are generally the ones that are really trusted. Okay, and trust can be lost very, very quickly as well. Yeah. So I do think that if you take that view, that I want this organisation to last. I also want to avoid risks of embarrassing scandal and everything. then I think all these things are an investment in that. So, but you've got to get away from just the pure profit sheet. Otherwise, it's meaningless to even. Don't pretend you're ethical. Don't pretend you have integrity if you're not prepared to say, yeah, I will reduce my profit sometimes.
I think this is something that is really changing in the market, because in the beginning of the 20th century, people were really focused on profit, and even consumers, they were buying without thinking of the impact of what they buy, and maybe if they buy this type of coffee, it's not good for them. At these times, it doesn't exist. People weren't aware. And now that people are more and more aware, they are driving behaviors, company behaviors on the market, because now company knows if they don't act good or pretend to act good sometimes, they won't make the sale. So there is kind of a
virtuous circle, we say.
Exactly, that is in place. But in the beginning of this 20th century, if I come back to sales, we learn people how to sell, I would say, aggressively, like unethical selling methods. And still they are using these old techniques that people don't want anymore, and they can't stop doing it. So why do you think people can go away from these old methods if they don't work anymore? And they know that people don't want that anymore.
Look, it's a good question, but I suppose I have to be a bit skeptical and say, is it true they don't work anymore? You know, I think that a lot more and more consumers, when we are acting as consumers, are demanding greater ethics, but a lot of the time we're not. I mean, I mentioned animal welfare earlier, and it's quite alarming. You know, 90% probably of the dairy and meat that is sold in a country like the UK is fairly low welfare, to be honest, and people don't even think about it. So I don't think there are many people, I think still a minority of customers who are really demanding this. Everyone says they like it, but they're not demanding it. And at the same time, some of those old methods you talk about, the unethical methods, they do unfortunately still seem to work, right? So I don't think people are doing something which is evidently ineffective, but I think it's short term. And I think people aren't appreciating the risks of doing this. I think that too often, when it comes to business ethics, people are just reacting to what's happening, and they don't know what the next issue is. So, there's a big scandal, paper cups and plastic becomes a big issue in the news. And so everyone starts announcing, we're reducing our plastic, we're taking away our plastic straws. But it's late, it's just responding. And the organizations that can say, well, we've done this before, when that happens, people say, well, they understood before, they get a benefit. But I'll tell you the other issue I think is a real problem is I do think that too often people treat ethics as like avoiding traps, things we must not do. So the list comes in. So, okay, we're going to avoid blood diamonds. All right. We're going to avoid palm oil. Okay. We're going to. So people are responding to events, they're avoiding things. And actually, like a person of integrity, that's not the way you act. As a person of integrity or a good person, you try to do the best before someone points to you and says that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. The commitment to good ethics is often not embedded enough in the organization. And it becomes the job of a department. You look after this. We run the business. You look after the ethics. So I do think it's difficult to do well, and not enough people do it well.
There is this article on CSR and CSR and philosophy you wrote, and you picked up this idea from Buddhism, which is those who don't steal don't need precepts about against thefts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think there should be precepts about integrity in sales?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this was just a very specific saying from a Buddhist teacher. But the basic idea is found in, actually, I think perhaps more articulated in the philosophy of both Aristotle and Confucius. So the idea is this, that let's not think about organized, let's think about people for a minute. Think about the people who you would say are the morally best people you know. And then ask yourself, do they kind of consult a set of moral rules or principles before they act? And the answer, I guess, would almost always be no. You know, these people are kind, they're sympathetic, they're empathetic, they're helpful, they're not selfish. These are things about their character. They don't stop and ask, you know, if they help someone in the street, they don't walk down the street and say, is this an example of where I should follow Kant's principle that I should act only according to that maxim by which, you know, except they don't do that. They go, person in need, help, you know. So acting well is a matter of character, and acting badly is often a matter of character too. So that's what it means. Now, does that mean you shouldn't have rules? Well, that's too idealistic, because in a company, in an organization, it can be helpful to have clear rules and principles. And sometimes you absolutely have to have policies on certain things, you know, you have to be clear. But the point is this, if you have rules, but you have a workforce, you have an organization where people are not motivated to follow the rules, because then those rules are going to have a very limited impact. At the same time, if you happen to have an organization which is full of people who are fully motivated to do the right thing all the time, you wouldn't need the rules. In practice, you always need the rules because everything's a mix. But the ideal is to be in a situation whereby the rules aren't as important as the ethos, you know, the character of the organization.
Absolutely.
If you've got an organization where everybody knows they are expected to behave well, right? And they will be rewarded for that, and they will be not rewarded if they do else, then their first thing is not always to ask, what do the rules say? It's simply to ask, what's the right thing to do here? And that is what leads to a better organization.
Do you think it means people should recruit people that are ready, that are made like this, I would say? Or do you think they can shape them in a way that is more respectful of the company?
Well, look, it's a good question. I think actually, you should, you know, when you're recruiting somebody, I think that their kind of moral integrity and their moral character should be a very major part of the recruiting process. So it's not an either or, but at the same time, you know, you have to kind of create the environment in which people can be their best selves. Because the thing is, you know, most people are not, you know, good to the core or bad to the core. Most people are mixed. And, you know, what really makes the difference as to which way someone goes is often the environment they are in. If you put an average person who's just a normal, decent person, but you put them in an organization where they can see that everybody is simply trying to do the best thing for themselves and don't care about other people, then after a while, they're going to think, well, why should I be different? Because that's not good for me. You know, it's like expenses, business expenses, you know. If the culture of the organization is that everybody claims extra expenses, right? Then after a time, you think, well, if I don't do this, I'm being stupid, right? So I do it too.
Okay.
At the same time, if you're in an organization where it turns out that, you know, you can see that people really like honesty and they really want you to be honest, then the opportunity comes where there's something difficult happens and you think, should I speak about this? And well, you know, you can see that honesty is admired and encouraged, and so you speak the truth, you say the difficult thing. So you need to create the environment in which good behavior becomes more natural and bad behavior unnatural.
And do you think it's useful to write it, to think about it, and to spread the word through the company, saying we want to have ethics method when coming to sales, speaking about this, or just showing by example?
No, I think you do need both. It would be, you know, if I read Confucius and Aristotle, they would kind of say, really, you know, example is the most important thing, particularly Confucius, you know. And I think example is important, but Also, I think the explicit information needs to be there too. The important thing is they are in harmony, they are aligned, that what you're saying is also being demonstrated by how you act, right? Because the thing is, if you're only acting in that way but you're not talking about it, there's a possibility people won't really notice enough, right?
Yeah.
But if you're talking about it and not doing it, people just laugh and have no respect. So I think both things are important. Good positive messaging, but also, the actual demonstration by example. And that's where leadership is so important. Management and leadership has to do this.
Today, I feel like we are in a situation where becoming ethic when coming to sales is needed if you want to keep performing. So maybe it's too late, but it's a fact it's a market fact. So that's also why, because I think it is a good timing for people to change the way they are selling. How would you help them to do this shift when they have very old habits that it's very hard to separate from?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's more than one thing you can do. I mean, one thing is, look your family in the eye test. When you go home from work, would you be happy to tell people your methods and how you work?
Okay.
I'm not sure. If you're not happy with that, that's not very satisfying. But I think also, I think that you point to positive examples, right? I mean, I think we have plenty of examples of companies where, when you're talking about sales, when you use sales techniques which are not very ethical, they generally only work once.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because if it's not ethical, in a sense, you're promising people something they're not going to get in one way or another. And people recognize that, and it only works once. When you're ethical, then you get that repeat loyalty. You get people coming back and back and back. Now, I can think of examples of this in the UK. I mean, by the way, no organization is immune to problems, right? So even the most ethical companies sometimes have difficult times. I can think of products which had incredibly successful launches, right? Very, very successful launches on the basis of, I think, dishonest marketing. But neither of those products are today to be found on the shelves. It just didn't.
It doesn't last.
Okay, so integrity gives you legs. It gives you the long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the key thing. And if you're not interested in that,
what means performance today?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't value like hard sell and short-term gains, maybe also people will stop. And a solution, and we have implemented that several times, is to stop commissioning salespeople, stop giving them money for what they're doing, and having a key performance indicator about prospect satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and not about turnover anymore, about sales anymore. Thinking and trusting that if they give people good advices, if they care about them, money will come.
Yeah, that's true. You use the word trust, and I think that is such an important word.
How do you find balance between having rules and having too many rules? Because at the same time, you have to have kind of standards and give people, because many people want rules actually. When you ask them, they want rules.
Yeah, well, I think this is difficult. I think you have to be very careful. I think the rules should only be very precise when they have to be very precise, which is often the case around actual legal requirements rather than moral ones, actually. So sometimes there are certain things which everybody knows you must not do this, because if you do this, there's a regulation issue and the company could be fined, etc., etc. But generally speaking, I think that rather than very specific rules, people need to be clear about what the general principles are, what the ethos is, right? So, if you say if you've got a business which is a hospitality business, restaurant, cafe or something, then, you say, look, the main rule is this. We're into hospitality. Hospitality is our thing. Whatever you do, make sure it's consistent with that. Obviously, if a customer is being rude or is a problem, then you have to deal with it. But
is this what you call moral compass?
Sorry?
Is this what you call a moral compass?
Yeah, the moral compass is a phrase people use a lot, isn't it? And I'm not really. It's an interesting metaphor that people come back to. But maybe it is. Maybe it is in the sense that the point about a moral compass is what does a compass do? A compass just turns to the north. You know, it knows where it is. It doesn't kind of make a decision. It just has the right kind of habit. And I think in a way to have a good moral compass is not to. I mean, a compass is not an algorithm for discovering your location. It is something which moves with the magnetic field. In the same kind of way, to have a moral compass is to have the kind of character and disposition where you are naturally orienting yourselves, pointing yourself towards what is the best form of action. And that only happens through the building of character and in an organization, again, the building of the ethos of the organization. Yeah.
So it means people should, like business owners, should think more about how to build a global moral compass within the company?
Yeah, I think so. People have got to know what the values are. You know, what are the values? So what are the rules? What are the values that we're trying to uphold here? And when people really understand that and feel them, then they'll know what to do, which is in accordance with that. And it's a difficult thing to do because a lot of values language can sound very general. It can sound very vague, and also it can often sound insincere. You know, I mean, a lot of companies have a list of values, and it sounds wonderful. But I think the worst, you know, it's almost worse to have a set of values and not follow them than it is not to have a set of values, because people really, really notice and hate hypocrisy and dishonesty.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more, if I sum up what you said, it's more a question of culture, morale, and giving people more a frame rather than static rules to get them, and maybe trust, because when you do something you never done before, it's hard to go away from your old habits. So maybe there's something around trust that would help people navigate through sometimes the choice of going short term or doing like unethic things versus going long term and following the moral compass. Yeah,
it's good summary. I think.
Thank you.
Well, you know, what's the incentive? It's an interesting kind of philosophical question. Why be good? You know, why be good? And you know, some people think that's a very difficult question to answer because, you know, if you believe in a traditional religious view that you'll be punished by the Creator if you do the wrong thing, then you've got the stick. But where's the incentive? Why be good? Well, actually, I think the answer to that comes back to, you see it in people like David Hume, but also say Aristotle, Confucius, etc. In a way, there's no mystery about that. Human beings have naturally an ability to have a sympathy and feeling for other people. We don't like to see other people suffering. We don't like generally to see people suffering, particularly as a result of our actions, unless there are enemies, unless for that reason. And so there is a sense in which, if you think about what it feels like to live a good life, living a good life for most people would be a combination of things. It would include a flourishing in traditional material sense. People like Aristotle and Hume and Confucius were not the kind of philosophers who thought that you should be eating only rice and beans and living in a hole and drinking only water, right? A good life is a life in which you can enjoy comfort, friendship, good food, all these kind of things. So that's part of the good life. But the other part of the good life is actually to be something where you are kind of at peace with yourself and other people and the world. To know that the price being paid for your comfortable life is not that others are being exploited or others are being helped. And when you do a job is always more satisfying when you know that people are appreciating it. I mean, what really is, and if you just think of any job and you compare the example where the person's working with ethics and integrity and the one that's not, you never want to be the person not acting with integrity. If you have a restaurant and you're basically serving people bad food and it's too expensive, etc., you don't get satisfaction from that. It's not satisfying. You may make a profit, you may have a nice home, you may have a nice car, but it's kind of profoundly dissatisfying and it kind of erodes your character. If you have a restaurant, you serve people good food, it makes them happy and you know they'll be exploited. You go home and yes, you made the profit, but you're also feeling good. And most people, if they think about it, would say that yes, I would even prefer to have, I would not like to be poor. if in order to do this good job, I have to be poor and miserable, maybe I won't do it. I'll serve the bad food and take the money. But that's not the choice we make. But if I was to sort of have 80% of the salary doing good, 100% doing bad, most people would prefer that as a life. And then you also just think about your legacy and your reputation and what happens afterwards, I mean, nobody wants to go to their grave feeling they've left the world a worse place than when they started, right? I think most of us have very modest ambitions. There was a British actor who was a Quaker, actually, and I remember an interview with him, and he was asked what he wanted his epitaph to be, what people would say on his death. And he said, I would like people to be able to say he did little harm, right? And I think, that's wonderful in a way, because it's very honest. We can do so much harm with what we do, and simply not to cause harm is a great thing in itself. So I think the incentives are really, really clear. And in a way, I think that if people aren't motivated by it, it's because they haven't stopped to think about it. They have just assumed, they've assumed that success means certain things. And if anyone thinks about it for 2 minutes, they know that's not right.
Yeah, I really like this point of view. It's like if you want a good life, I would say to the salespeople that are looking at us, be a good sales if you want a good life. But there is another thing that looks like being this person serving good food and making joy around them. It's like if you have to pay the price of being less profitable. Maybe I'm wrong, but then when I listen to what you said, it's like whether you are people of integrity, but you do less profits, or you're not, and you're doing more.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that often you can even make more profit actually with integrity. The question is simply what's driving the decision. And that's all I'm saying. That it goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning of the discussion. It's not that it's not possible to have a very, very successful business and be very profitable at being good. It's just that if you're serious about being good, your priority cannot be the maximization of profit. So all I'm saying is you have to be prepared that maybe that's a choice you have to make. But it's not always, far from it. And I think there are lots of really successful businesses which are run on very, very ethical lines, and everybody is happy. Everyone's making a good profit. Everyone's making a good living. So it's not that you have to make the choice of less profit and good or whatever. It's just that you have to be clear that there may be times where that is necessary.
Yeah. This is I think what you just said is very important, because it means that managers should allow salespeople to make the right decision, even if it means they will make less profit.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a major point, because today, where they are mostly judged on how much money they bring back to the company.
Yeah. But again, it's so short term, isn't it? Because I think about, people I've paid for certain services in building, housing, etc. And if there's one thing that will make me trust someone and go back to them and to have a long-term customer, it's when they tell me that I shouldn't be paying for something they could be selling me. Yeah. We had behind it, I have a black curtain because the house is being done and the walls are being replastered.
Okay.
The person doing the plastering of the walls came in and said, I don't think you have to plaster that wall. I think that, it could be okay. You could just paint it. I don't have to plaster it. It will save you a few £100. Yeah.
Great.
And because he says that, I know to trust him.
Don't say that because
whereas there are other kind of people who, they come in and you just ask them, oh yeah, you need this, because they will always tell you need what they are selling, right? And so if someone's job is sales and they come back and say, no, I didn't do the sale today because actually I told the customer they don't need it now, then the manager should say, fantastic, that's brilliant.
Exactly.
Because you've got the trust of that person now. That is brilliant. And in fact, had you sold them something they didn't need, probably they would have found out later and we would have lost a customer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's thinking more long term, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I think it's a really nice way to finish this interview. Thank you very much, Julian.
Thank you, Quentin. A pleasure. Look your family in the eye test. When you go home from work, would you be happy to tell people your methods and how you work? In fact, had you sold them something they didn't need, probably they would have found out later and we would have lost a customer.